Hello, everybody. My name's Rebecca, and welcome back to My Bookish Travels. Today, I'm going to be discussing and wrapping up the books that I read in the month of April. Now, I didn't read as much as I would have liked to, and that is due in part to the fact that I was in the pre-stage of a reading slump. I'm currently in a full-blown reading slump at the moment, but in April, I was trying to choose some light, funny reads. I was trying to choose some short, quick reads, and that just did not happen at all, or at least it didn't happen as much as I was hopeful it did in that pre-reading stage. It usually takes me forever to read, and I'm usually a little more critical about if I like or dislike something. So I hope you guys enjoy getting to see what happens when Rebecca has a reading slump. What does she read, and how hard is she on her ratings? So let's jump into this wrap up. The first book that I read was Politically Correct Bedtime Stories, Modern Tales for Our Life and Times by James Finn Gardner, and this book I gave 2 out of 5 stars. It wasn't the best in the humor side of things. I was expecting with it being politically correct to be a little more humorous than anything, but it is exactly what it says. He is taking fairy tales and making them more politically correct with regards to what takes place in the story. I was looking for something more on the humorous side than the realistic side, I guess I should say. So it just kind of fell flat for me. I will say that some of them did work, but for the most part, I didn't really enjoy reading them. So that is why I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books that I read, Beauty Bunny, Volume 7 and Volume 8 by Mary Yoshino, and I ended up giving both of these 5 out of 5 stars. I read them both on my Kindle, and I love Mary Yoshino for her writing and art style. It's so classic and so beautiful, and I feel like she totally captivates the young teenage shoujo romance genre to a T. I absolutely loved this series just as much as I loved her previous one, Peach Heaven, and I love how she always goes that one step further and will show something that takes place a few years down the road. It just culminates in a complete story arc, and it always makes me happy. So for that reason, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars for both volumes, and it did actually complete that series for me. The next one that I read was again another manga on my Kindle. It was a Harlequin romance manga, and it was called Ravelli's Defiant Bride by Ayumu Aso. And the original story is by Lynn Graham. This one was a unique one. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. As much as I liked the story, I found that there were certain things that I was kind of iffy about, and I didn't feel like I got the full story effect. So although it was good, it was okay, I kind of needed certain things to have been included a little bit further in the story, and I just didn't get that. It didn't feel like the complete story arc that I'm somewhat used to getting when it comes to the Harlequin romance, and that is why I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The next one that I listened to was Tame Your Inner Critic by Claire Bowditch. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and it is an Audible original series that was narrated by Claire herself, and I thought this was extremely well done. Claire takes a lot of her personal experiences dealing with her own inner critic and how that affected her to kind of encourage others to take control of their inner critic and tame it, as the title says. I found this very important because I know that all of us at some point in time have dealt with issues with our critics. And with that being said, our critics aren't always other people being critical of us. We are our worst critic, and we can hurt ourselves 100 times worse with the thoughts in our heads, which come from our inner critic. And Claire really encourages us to take control of that and to really enhance looking at it head on and not shying away from it. And I really appreciated that. I know that I have a horrible inner critic that talks me down of doing so many amazing or so many fun things in my life. And it's something that I know I need to work on. And I think if you guys have not listened to this on Audible and you do have Audible, I highly recommend giving it a listen. The next one that I read was Scandalously Expecting His Child by Jet, and the original story is by Olivia Gates. This is another Harlequin romance manga. I read it on my Kindle yet again, and you can tell my Kindle was my friend this month. This one, though, was 2 out of 5 stars, and I was being generous in giving it the 2 out of 5, but there was a key thing in this story that I absolutely detested. I did not appreciate it being part of the story, and I understand that it is a key thing. Based on the title, you know that some character does get pregnant, but there's so many things in this story that I just did not appreciate, and I know that I'm only getting part of the story, so perhaps the physical novel itself by Olivia Gates is better. But for this manga, I was being generous in giving it those 2 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend do not have this be your first read for a Harlequin romance manga. I feel like there's better ones out there. This one just definitely hit on some notes that I didn't like, and for that reason, I tried to be generous, but not too generous with my rating. The next book that I read was Once Upon a More Enlightened Time, More Politically Correct Bedtime Stories by James Finn Gardner. Now, this one I already owned with the first one. I bought the 2 of them in a library book sale many months ago, so I probably should have just bought the first one and seen if I liked it. I gave this 1 out of 5 stars. I was not okay with this one at all. I did not like the direction that the author took in a number of the stories. It just felt very uncomfortable at a lot of times with reading it. And again, the humor definitely fell flat with me. I just did not appreciate it. And yes, maybe once or twice I laughed at something taking place, but for the most part, this story just did not work. The fairy tales that he selected and the situations that he decided to politically correct, the humor portion of it just definitely fell flat, and I was extremely uncomfortable reading this. So for that, I gave this 1 out of 5, and I think I'm going to DNF the rest of this series. I know that there is one more, and it is a Christmas-themed politically correct storytelling, but I don't really have any desire to read that, especially with how much this one made me slightly uncomfortable. The final book that I read in the month of April was The Earl and the Fairy Volume 2, with the story and art by Ayoko and the original concept by Mizu Teni. And I forgot so much about what happened in this manga. I absolutely loved this. There were so many times that I was shocked with what was taking place, and I cannot believe that there's 2 more mangas that I get to read of this, because it almost feels like the story arc was completed with this one. But there's so much more that I'm excited to see taking place in this world. If you guys love magical realism and taking place in Victorian England, this is definitely the manga series for you. I love it so much, and I really am contemplating getting a subscription with Crunchyroll so that I can finally watch all of the anime that I want to. This series, guys, you should read it. It's about a fairy doctor and a criminal who says that he is the descendant of the Blue Knight. And that's the most that I'm going to tell you. If you guys are intrigued with me just telling you those basic details, definitely give this a try. So, short and sweet and to the point, those were the books that I read in April. When I finished the second volume of The Earl and the Fairy, that was the last book that I read before the pre-reading slump ended up disappearing and I slipped into the full-on reading slump. And I'm not sure what you guys do when you hit a reading slump, but my go-to is definitely watching Asian dramas. I just have no desire whatsoever when it comes to books. And with that being said, I hope you all stay safe and stay well, and I will see you next time. Bye.